I have seen you. Hope it's going well, even if it's only 14 days old. The usual housekeeping. Members, ladies and gentlemen up there in the public gallery, there are no plans for a fire alarm test this evening. So if you do hear a continuously ringing bell, let's head for the canopy over at Waitrose there, via the green doors there, and one to my right. Please, members and members of the public too, can we switch our mobile phones off or to silent? And members, we are being webcast, so can we be sure our cards are plugged in and we do use the microphone. On to the agenda then. The minutes of our previous meeting held on the 3rd of December. They've been on the table there for the last half hour or so. Is it your wish that I sign them as a correct record? Thank you. Apologies for absence, please, Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies from Councillors Elizabeth Cable, Tom Martin, Stephen Reynolds, Adam Taylor-Smith and Simon Thornton.
Thank you very much. Disclosure of interest?
None received before the meeting.
Any late disclosures, members? No? Questions by members of the public?
None, Chairman.
Any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting? Elizabeth?
No, Chairman. Thank you very much.
We are on to applications for planning permission. Item A1 then, both of our applications this evening are subject to public speaking. Item A1, WA 2014/1684, the erection of a dwelling following demolition of existing detached garage, together with alterations to elevation of existing dwelling and associated works at 23 South Hill, Godalming, as amended by letter dated the 26th of November and plan received 26th of November 2014. We did have the site visit, very, very useful. Bit breezy, bit chill, but we were there. So I believe, Barry, you're going to take us through this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members. So we have application is for erection of a dwelling following the demolition of existing detached garage, together with alterations to the elevation of the existing dwelling and associated work. Here we have in front of us the location plan with I hope you see the little red arrow I've drawn there highlighting the application site, and here we have an aerial view of the application site. This is South Hill in Godalming, off Cattershall Lane, right at the top of the hill. Here we have a photograph showing the street scene. This is the host dwelling, which will lose its garage, which is being hidden by this tree, and the proposed dwelling is located here. Here we have a street scene just slightly further down, showing that there is a slight change in style of properties, but nothing significant. And a street scene of the other direction, number 24. Here we have the site in slightly greater detail, photographical-wise, showing the garage, which is due to be demolished if permission is granted. Here you'll see a shared, well, it's not a shared driveway, but a driveway that serves this property and one that serves the neighbouring property. This is the current driveway for number 23. Here we have a photograph looking southeast from the existing garage. You'll see from here, and members who came to site on Monday will know that the garden land to the rear of the property rises quite significantly. Here we have a photograph within the site looking towards number 23 and a photograph looking towards number 24. This is the garage that is proposed to be demolished. This is a view, as I suggested, the site rises significantly towards the hillside, and this is taken from the back of the garden looking down to the garage. And this is a view of the raised rear garden area of number 24, who have a similar arrangement with the garden being a significantly higher level than that of the dwelling. Here we have the existing block plan showing the existing house, number 23, the garage, which is to be demolished, and the neighbouring property, number 24. As part of this application, there is some alterations to number 23, and that is the insertion of a new window to serve the second bedroom on the first floor of the host property, number 23. Here we have the existing and proposed elevations, or the existing elevations rather, number 23 South Hill and the proposed. You'll see that the only addition really is this window here. Here we have the existing elevations of the garage, which is to be demolished as part of the planning application, and now we have the proposed floor plans of the new dwelling. it is a 4-bedroom, or proposed to be a 4-bedroom dwelling with all bedroom accommodation on the first floor. Here we have the elevations of the new dwelling. As you'll see, it is commensurate with the architectural vernacular of South Hill. Here we have a plan showing the street scene as existing, and here we have a plan showing the street scene as proposed, with this property here being the new dwelling. A plan in front of you now shows the cross-section of the rear amenity space. As I spoke before, the land rises to the rear. This plan shows how they would achieve the regrading of that land so as to provide amenity space, whilst also moving the grading the land in a way so as not as to impact on the lower windows of the proposed new dwelling. In front of us now we have the parking plan showing the provision of 5 car parking spaces. The guidance, Waverley Borough Council guidance, is to have 2.5 spaces per 4-bedroom dwelling. We have 2 4-bedroom dwellings, so we have 5 spaces. 3 here and 2 here. Now moving on to determining issues, matters of technical judgment, highway considerations and parking. Our colleagues in the Highways Authority have assessed the application from a capacity and safety point of view and raised no objection. And with regards to parking, the 5 spaces meet with the parking guidance of Waverley Borough Council. Moving on to flooding considerations, it was raised on site the issue of flooding coming down from the hillsides into the gardens and into the properties on South Hill. Now the application site is located in flood zone 1, so is not an area at risk of river flooding. With regards to surface water flooding, this is something that the applicant themselves would need to manage if there is indeed a problem, and this is something that could be dealt with through the building control regime. Looking at matters of judgment, impact on visual amenity, looking at the site, whilst the site is currently open, as in it's absent of a large built form, it only has that small single garage, the land does rise significantly, so you don't see views through the site, you see views to the raised back garden. So whilst there's no building on there, we don't have open views beyond and further. We are viewing the backdrop of the hillside. Officers consider that to introduce a building into this location would not have a detrimental impact on the visual amenity of that part of South Hill. Impact on trees and ancient woodland. The landscape and tree officers looked at the application and has suggested a condition on the application, I think it's condition number 9, that if permission is to be granted, a tree protection scheme should be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. Looking at amenity space, policy H10 of the local plan seeks that for family dwellings there should be sufficient space for families to be able to go about their day-to-day lives in private amenity space, so before taking food and barbecuing or hanging out washing, what one does in the amenity space. Looking at the cross-section plan and that grade terrace effect, officers consider there will be sufficient space so as to meet the needs of a family. With regards to impact on residential amenity, the windows at the side of the proposed dwelling are conditioned to be obscurely glazed, and in this location, or in a location like this, it is to be expected that there will be some intervisibility between rear gardens of properties, being in an urban area such as this. So the recommendation is, as set out on the agenda, that permission be granted subject to conditions in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. We have two public speakers. Firstly, Mr. Drudge. I'm sure it's been explained to you, Mr. Drudge. You have 3 minutes, 2 minutes with the green light, 1 with the amber, and when you get onto the red one, if you're still speaking, I will ask you to wind up when you're ready.
Good evening. I'm not going to take up too much of your time. I believe that you already have all of our objections from those that in the street that objected, and you will have already considered those. So I just really want to reiterate, we believe the proposed development does not respect the local context and street pattern. or in particular scale and proportions of the buildings surrounding it, would be entirely out of character with the rest of the road. The road runs as a group of semis, a detached, semis detached. This would mean that we would have another detached property put in against another already existing detached property. Our other problem that we would have is with the increase in traffic flow and the parking. We already struggle at times with visitors parking because of entrance to drives. It is a very tight space up there. We have problems with large vehicles turning round, particularly the dust cart has to reverse up there. Any deliveries that we have with large vehicles, they also struggle to get up there. The increase in the housing, yes, 2.5 parking spaces for each house, but to try and put 3 parking spaces at the top there and expect them to get in and out would result in the curbs being dropped and losing on-street parking for our visitors, which is our other concern. I think everything else is covered in our letters of objection. Really, that's about all I have to say, and I thank you very much for your time.
Sorry, thank you very much. And Mr. Kingerley?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I speak in favour of this proposal. This application creates a new family house 5 minutes walk from Godalming High Street. Your officer's report seems an excellent document which comprehensively considers all the aspects to this application. Very few people are actually impacted in any way. As you'll see from the street scene photograph, the new house is at the very end of South Hill. There is no passing traffic. Looking up the street, the new house is set back and largely screened by the existing property. The new dwelling fits very neatly into the space beside 23 South Hill and does not encroach on 24 South Hill or afford any views over its garden. The amenity space for the new house is actually much larger than that shown on the plan we saw, or the section we saw on screen a moment ago, because the garden goes right into a triangle at the top. So the majority of the amenity space for the new house is at the top there. The property spacing is greater than that approved for other detached dwellings in South Hill, notably the row of 4 detached houses, including number 6 and number 7. There is no overlooking, there are no windows facing the left, the rear windows face woodland, the front faces the street, and the right-hand side is conditioned opaque. It's worth keeping in mind that the first floor windows on this side are in fact ground floor windows due to the hill slope. South Hill contains a mix of houses with and without garages. These days many of us use our garages as a storage shed, and perhaps this point was acknowledged when the council recently approved the conversion of 30 South Hill's garage into living space. The parking meets requirements with a total of 5 off-road spaces, 3 side-by-side spaces for the new house, and 2 side-by-side spaces for the existing. The new drive also has a benefit to 24 South Hill. The picture of the existing driveway shows that the current drive for 23 South Hill is too narrow. As a result, part of 24 South Hill's drive needs to be kept clear to allow access. Widening the drive will remove this problem. This proposal therefore has the ability to reduce on-street parking demand by providing 5 good off-road spaces and increasing the usable drive area for 24 South Hill. The Town Council don't object, highways don't object. Your planners are recommending that this new family house in the town is approved, and I therefore encourage you to accept their recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members? Ms Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And thank you for the comprehensive report from the officers. Firstly, I have a general comment about the proposed site. It is a north-facing property with southerly, easterly and southwesterly sunlight, where the sunlight moves, and I do have concerns that that might be significantly reduced by the ancient woodland behind. The steep banks affecting particularly the ground floor amenity and the neighbouring property to the east, and the fact that it is set back further into the hillside by some 4.2 metres, which means that the overhanging trees will increase any loss of light to the property now and in the future compared with its neighbours. The garden area is at the top of the site and is also overhung by the area of ancient woodland, and I suspect this is probably why the original layout of South Hill did not include another dwelling here in the first place. This and the difficulty of excavating a dwelling space so far into the existing hillside does cause me some concern. I noticed that there are some elevational or sectional details not included in the report that was shown on the screen. Am I right in thinking that, Mr. Monsieur, that they just came in today? Right, they would need to have a little closer look at those. But the impact now and in the future against the ancient woodland is the area that concerns me. Again, it's not clear from the sections plans provided as to how the land will be altered to achieve the levels required to tie in with the landscaping around the whole site. I don't think, as the report says, that this is just a matter of aesthetics. There is at most 1 metre between the estimated overdig necessary for the build and the root protection area of the significant tree in the ancient woodlands. And as that is described in the report as an area of over 10 metres, it's likely that that 1 metre could be swallowed up by a reasonable margin of error. Therefore, the build, in my opinion, would be likely to harm the significant tree in the ancient woodland, and to seek to cover this by conditions I don't think is adequate. There has been, according to the officer's report, no accurate survey or inspection carried out on this tree, and the application should contain, as a minimum, such detailed reports before I think we as a committee can make a decision. Further pressures on the ancient woodland do concern me, because over the years, as people use the amenity land and as the property itself is set so much farther back into the hillside, there will be future pressure to cut back the wooded area, and it will grow. Finally, for the addition of another 4-bedroomed house in that very tight cul-de-sac, and it is tight, they build them differently now. The 5 parking spaces shown on the plan are on the plan fitting in, but the open plan aspect of the drives, as we've seen from the first photograph in the presentation, creates a very tight fit between properties. And the cul-de-sac configuration was really not designed for this level of shared use, and it will affect the amenity of neighbours and the visual amenity of that cul-de-sac. It's a very tight fit, and I really have concerns, although not shared by the highways, but not for the first time. I think committees are at variance with the views of highways. I think that the way that this house goes in and the amenity that is required by future residents and neighbouring residents, I think this is too tight a fit in too dark and awkward a spot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very concerned about the hillside flooding. The developer says it will be managed. How will this be done?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regards to flooding, we have no evidence in front of us of flooding, although, sorry, pardon me, I do believe that we have some anecdotal evidence from a resident who knows the site or that area well and says that water does come down from the hillsides. But this is something that we would expect the developer to factor into his build. and to incorporate as part of his proposal. And that would be for him, and then when he gets his proposal signed off by building control, to deal with it at that point.
Second point, Mr. Chairman, I think this new development is far too close to number 23. I should be at least another 2 metres further apart.
Thank you very much. Please, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must admit I share Councillor Thompson's concerns. It was interesting seeing that cutaway amenity space on the picture. It doesn't look very flat to me, which would I don't quite see how you can do a barbecue on one of those. Everything would be, you'd have to have very special chairs with funny legs. And also, I think that would rather encourage any flooding as well. What does concern me is, as Councillor Thompson says, by having to dig so deeply into the hillside, I think it's likely to unsettle the root balls of that ancient woodland ridge at the top. I think it's going to be very difficult. When we were there at the site visit, that end of the cul-de-sac was already manic. We would assume that most people would have gone to work because it was 9:30 when we were there, and yet there was hardly anywhere for us to park at all. It was very difficult to get in. And looking at the driveways, well, they'd have to reverse out, or I don't know how, to get 3 cars into that space, I think you'd have to be extremely clever. I'm very worried about this, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martin.
Thank you. One of the difficulties of building houses in Godalming is that quite frequently houses are built close to the valley sides, and they are the wooded valley sides of Godalming. We go to a great deal of length to keep a wooded aspect in the town. I think we do that pretty well. And of course we have to balance that against the need for housing. And I have to say, I think there are many examples in Godalming where houses are built well into the valley side or the hillside, all over the town, and I think it's been done with success, and I don't see any reason why this shouldn't be a success as far as that particular aspect is concerned. And certainly as far as the trees are concerned, I think that can be overstated in terms of impact on roots and so on and so forth. I'm sure that can be dealt with in conditions that might apply, and those conditions would reasonably apply. However, having said that, it is a tight fit, and I do accept the argument that this is a very marginal application as far as I'm concerned. I'm not wholly convinced of the rightness of it, but I have to say I think I will go along with the officer's view. The thing that I'm most concerned with, frankly, is parking. And I do know that this area is not only used by, of course, the residents, but also by many people who work in the town who come to choose to park their cars there for free. And that, of course, is only getting worse as a result of residents-only parking, which has been introduced in other parts of the town as of the last few days. And there is a great deal of concern, I know, concerning that. However, if we were to object to the application because of that, I fear we wouldn't be successful in any appeal that might take place, because there are 5 parking spaces which are there, and I don't think this is going to greatly worsen. This one application will not greatly worsen the situation, although I do accept it is a difficult position, and I'm very sympathetic to the difficulties of parking. In terms of the impact on the amenity and the view of the street scene, I do understand Mr. Judge's point about semi-detached and then semis and detached and so on and so forth. But this, as it would be tucked away, I don't see a huge impact on the visual amenity of the street scene, although I do accept it would be a slight change. So, although I'm not that madly keen on this, I have to say I can't find sufficient objection that I think would be sustainable against an appeal. and I will, I think, unless I hear anything to the contrary, which convinces me, I'll be voting for the application.
Thank you very much. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not been lost on me what the applicant said about the amenity space. Actually, there is quite a lot of amenity space there, I think. It's not only the part of the land which is near the house. There's a whole lot of land which could be quite useful towards the back of the triangle. So I'm not concerned about amenity space, but I am, as has already been said by my colleagues, concerned about the parking. And I do think that, as we've already heard, at 9:30 on a Monday morning, when the road was quite crammed with cars, I do really feel quite concerned about the toing and froing of cars on that drive, particularly being on a slope. I know you get used to these things, but it is a concern for me. So whilst I'm not worried about the amenity space, that's not an issue for me. I think, as has been said, the whole of Godalming is built on hillsides and people manage, and with a decent set of steps going up to the back of the garden, they'd have quite a nice amenity space up there. It is the parking, and I need to think very carefully and hear what my colleagues are saying about that, as to whether, in fact, it could be a robust reason for not agreeing with officers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Can I first of all just ask, on page 26, right at the bottom, it says that the applicants have been asked to provide additional justification as to why an additional space could not be provided, and an oral report will be made on this at this meeting. Have I missed something, or...?
So the oral report relates to the additional space. So when the application initially came in, there was only 4 car parking spaces, and now there are the 5 that we've seen on screen. So that is the oral report is the revised plan you've seen on screen. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now my observations, first of all, I always prefer to have floor plans that actually show some sort of furniture in there to give you a real understanding of what the occupation can be. So given that they weren't provided, I have measured up the room sizes, and I would say that in terms of persons, this 4-bedroom place could accommodate 6 people. Now, so ultimately it could be sort of 6 vehicles, but if we took a more average view, I would certainly see in reality a need for 4 vehicles for this particular building over the time that it's going to be habitable. So immediately we have 3 vehicles shown on the drawing, and I think that that is sort of an underrepresentation of what the real situation will be at some time. I found it also interesting that this layout of the vehicles is a second attempt to show the positioning of 3 vehicles. So I think that the architect or so obviously has a belief that things are a little bit difficult there, and their original layout was not particularly practical. Now, the other aspect is that we see in 23, I think it is, a bulge which seems to sort of encroach, from my perspective at least, onto this planned new building territory. So that bulge doesn't help the sort of manoeuvrability of vehicles. And if we went back to that first photograph, I agree that the block paving, if I can call it that, is sort of throughout. But for me, the darker bricks along the centre are definitive of the boundary. And I personally think that there will be in time and so on, and at times, I should probably say, overrunning with the proposed new vehicles, or indeed 24's vehicle onto. So there needs to be considerable understanding, I would suggest, between neighbours, and that doesn't always happen these days. So far as the actual building is concerned, its design and so on, I find that quite reasonable. But I am concerned, as I normally am, about parking and these vehicles and the number of extra ones that are provided. We know that throughout Godalming, throughout Milford even, wherever we go, we have this vehicle clutter, and it is not enhancing our environment whatsoever. And the provision of one new building, one new dwelling, in this particular space doesn't really contribute, in my view, to relieving the housing shortage. Now, it has been mentioned by Councillor Martin that, and particularly from the report as we read it, that it is probably very difficult to make the case that it should not be granted. But I do conclude and say I do not feel this makes a positive contribution to the environment in South Hills. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. Could we put back on the screen the two lists of determining issues that we need to look at? Thank you. The matters of technical judgment, I have less concern with. The highways considerations have no doubt been examined by our highly expert, energetic and enthusiastic county highways officers, and the flooding considerations seem to me to be marginal, although perhaps problematic on a small scale. But the other matters of judgment, I find this application appears to me to fail on almost every one. The impact on visual amenity is clearly quite detrimental to the locality. The amenity space, to my mind, is rather like an elongated stepladder and totally inadequate for any kind of family life, which is a requirement of the MPPF. And the impact on residential amenity by squeezing yet another house into the slot where the only attractive plot on the entire estate is this one before it's messed about with and another house added. I don't know a great deal about the technicalities of impact on trees and ancient woodland, but I know my colleague on my left does know a great deal about it, and I am somewhat persuaded by what she has to say. I'm not favourably disposed towards this application, Chairman, but I will listen carefully to the rest of the debate.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martin.
Thank you. I think I would not accept that this is the best site in the entire road, but I guess that's a question of judgment. I'd just like to return to this question of parking and the issues there. I think the difficulty for me, I think, is that much of the parking in this street is from people who don't live there. That's the condition, that's the difficulty during the day. And that, of course, is capable of being solved if you do what has been done in other parts of the town, although I'm not very happy with those solutions. And then in terms of parking spaces, I live in a cul-de-sac, and I've just counted up the houses around me. There are 9 houses around me at the top of the cul-de-sac, and they're all 5-bedroom and 4-bedroom houses, and there are 12 cars between those 9 houses. So although I accept that it's entirely possible that many more cars could be a part of a 4-bedroom associated with a 4-bedroom house, I think that can be overstated. So I've heard much of the discussion, but I'm not that keen on that. But I will continue to go with the officer's judgment on this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I can throw in my 10 penneth. Interesting about this matter of parking. I can't remember exactly how many of us turned up for the site visit at 9:30, but we all managed to park a car there, and there were still spaces even after we had all parked. Whether or not it restricted the appearance of either commuters or shoppers from elsewhere in Godalming, I'm not sure that that really matters, but it does seem to me at least that with the cars of half a dozen or so councillors on a site visit, that's at least more than the 5 parking spaces that this application is advocating. I can't help but wonder, I don't know when South Hill was actually built, but it doesn't look too old to me, and it does occur to me that if at the time it was built, the architect and the builder actually put this house in at the time, it would not look out of place. It would not look overdevelopment, and it would not, to my mind, have affected the street scene either. So that in that respect, I don't have a problem with it. As regards the lack of amenity space at the back of the house, I grew up in southeast London. You may tell it from my accent, but in the house that I lived, we perched on the side of a hill. 3.5 feet from the back wall of the house and the back door and the French doors from the sitting room, there was a 4.5-inch boundary wall supporting the garden. The garden itself sloped at an angle of 45 degrees up to a 6.5-foot fence, which was the end of the garden. We lived with it for a great many years until, as I grew up, I eventually dug it out and managed to make the ground flat. But, as I say, we did live with it, and it is possible, I think, if people choose to live with a sloping garden, they can do so. You and I might not wish to do so, but others do, and they manage it as well. I have no problem with this at all. I have no problem with the parking, the street scene, or the addition of this house as well. I'm comfortable with the officer's recommendation. However, that is a personal view. Are there any other speakers, please? Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. If I might come back, I was interested in your comments, very interested indeed. I do feel that if you wish to live in the sort of property that has a stepped garden in a very restricted space, that might well be available to you in parts of London, but it's not what I would really expect people to be coming and living in Waverley for, and certainly not in Godalming. So I'm not at all sure that that makes this a more appropriate development or not. As far as parking is concerned, I am aware that there is adequate parking there, but by the provision of 5 extra car parking spaces, you are alleviating any potential parking problem, it is true, to that extent. But at the same time, you are having an adverse impact on the amenity and residential amenity area. So you can't have it both ways. Either you have the parking on the site and lose amenity value, or you have parking on the road and create a parking problem. Looking at the site now, you can see it without the parking spaces. After this plan is approved, if it is approved and the building is put there, the parking will be fine, but the amenity will be lost. So I think it's one or the other. It depends which members feel is the most important aspect of a planning application of this kind.
Thank you very much. Ms. Thompson.
Thank you for letting me come back, Mr. Chairman, and it has been interesting to hear your views and other members' views on the various aspects of this application, and it is a tricky site. As far as saying, yes, you know, people do live with very tall gardens, very steep gardens with limited amenity space, and have to make do. That's, to me, is not the point of new building in the year 2015. I think what we have to do is to enhance our environment as far as possible by new development, and I don't think we can go down the path of saying, oh, it's all right, we can squeeze another one in because it's just about okay and it's better than it used to be 20 or 30 years ago. The whole point, as I understand it, of planning and development when we look at properties is that it should enhance the amenity of the town. It should add something and not detract from the residential amenity of its neighbours, and to any significant extent. And I think this goes the wrong side of that fine line, and I appreciate what's said by officers in this report, but it is a matter of judgment, and my settled view, having listened to the comments of my colleagues, is that this awkward and unhappy site goes just the wrong side of that line, and we fail to achieve what we should achieve, and that is to give permission to residences that improve the amenity for those future residents and do not work to the detriment of the residential amenity of neighbours. And I feel sadly that on this occasion, because it's always nice to have a new family house in the town, I think this is not the spot to do it.
Mr. Martin?
I would observe that the amenity of an additional family home of this sort is also very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lee?
Unfortunately, Councillor Tom Martin isn't present, so may I ask the officers if we were minded to reject this particular application, what sort of grounds of strength do we have to put before the inspector?
I think the officers might wish to ask you that, Mr. Lee. But, we'll see.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, Councillor Lee, we would take you back to our slide of the determining issues, which we do hope is generally helpful to members. Those matters on the left-hand side, of course, are technical matters where we would guard you against generally finding reasons for refusal on. In relation to parking, most of the concern that's been expressed seems to be about parking pressures. There may be an argument to construct around not so much that the parking arrangements would cause highway harm in terms of a loss of highway safety, because of course the County Highway Authority are not objecting, so you would have difficulty in supporting that argument. But whilst we have found it to be acceptable in terms of the visual impact of the parking, you may find that the arrangements would not be satisfactory in terms of their visual impact and also the impact they have on parking pressures on the estate road in terms of inconvenience to other residents. Now, that's a difficult one in some ways to promote as a reason for refusal, but I think if it does summarise your concerns, then that one could be attached going forward as a reason for refusal to defend at appeal. The other matters on the right-hand side, which largely capture all the other concerns that have been expressed, would be matters of judgment, and I think you could construct reasons for refusal around those matters. Thank you.
You look as though you were coming back, Mr. Lee.
Only to say that my viewpoint following that very helpful explanation is that I don't think we have very strong grounds on which to refuse and get it accepted in that way by an inspector. Unfortunately, very unfortunately.
Mr. Morgan.
Sorry, Chairman, just a quick word, if I may, and I don't want to prolong this issue any further than necessary. I do find quite reprehensible this idea that we must be second-guessing what an inspector might say. I think there are very sound reasons for considering those matters of judgment to be a failure in terms of this application. That's more than sufficient, I think, to make a determination. What an inspector might say on a matter of judgment is not something that we can second guess. So it has to be our judgment on this day today.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers? If I could just pick up on one point that you made, Mr. Morgan, I do feel that it's our responsibility here for central planning to determine planning applications rather than perhaps design the houses that we might wish future residents of Godalming to move into. It's unfortunate that perhaps our responsibility doesn't stretch that far. However, if members are exhausted with their comments, then can we go to page 30? And subject to the raft of conditions there, the officer's recommendation is that permission be granted. Can I see those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
1, 2, 5. And those against? It looks like permission is granted. Thank you very much. Moving on then, item A2, WA 2014/1716. WA 2014/1716, the change of use of land and the erection of 3 dwellings at car park site to the rear of 72 to 76 High Street, Godalming, as amplified by letter dated the 17th of November 2014. Barry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application, as alluded to, relates to the change of use of land in the erection of 3 dwellings. First of all, I should apologise. Those members eagle-eyed among you will not have seen elevational drawings or detailed drawings in your committee papers. For that, we apologise. However, drawings and plans were available on the website and have been available on the file with council officers. Moving on. Here we have an aerial photograph showing the site. The site is to the rear of the Crown Car Park in Godalming. Members may recall, I think it was in December, you dealt with an application at Craddock's Printers for the change of use of the first floor into residential dwellings. Craddock's Printers is here. So we have the Crown Court Car Park, the Wetherspoons Public House. In here is where the market takes place on a Friday, and then we have this site here. Here we have a location plan showing the application site outlined in red with Craddock's Printers on the entrance at this point here. Here we have some photographs of the application site. It is in this location here. You'll notice, well, those of you who frequent Costa Coffee will be familiar with the Costa Coffee seating, outdoor seating in that location there, backing onto the rear of the application site. Here we have some more photographs looking across the site in all different directions. Here we have the location plan showing the position of the proposed 3 two-storey dwellings. This location here, bin and cycle storage here, and 3 car parking spaces here, 1 for each of the 2-bed properties, again in line with the council's guidelines. Here we have the proposed elevations. Properties are to be 2-storey, 8 metres to ridge, 5 metres to eaves, with slate roof and timber-clad weatherboarding around the buildings. Here we have the proposed floor plans. 2-bed dwellings. I've made a note here that the bedroom 2 is about 12 square metres, bedroom 1 about 16 square metres, but helpfully this does have furniture in the bedrooms, but you didn't have the plans to see the furniture, so it probably wasn't very much use to anyway. But you now see the furniture in the bedrooms. Here we have a street scene showing the properties behind which front onto the high street. They are listed properties. I should have also said this whole application site is within the conservation area. Looking now at those determining issues, matters of technical judgment, we have town centre considerations. The application site is within town centre area and the central shopping area. The framework tells us that within that area, residential properties can play an important role with regards to vibrance and vitality. And officers consider that this is such a site that would offer that extra footfall into the town centre without having a detrimental impact on any existing facilities. Next, looking at planning history and lawful use of the site. Those who go to the market on a Friday will know that this is in close proximity to the market site. However, the applicant confirms that where the proposal is to be sited is not where the market currently is. The market is across from it, and this would in no way prejudice the ability of that market to continue. This part of the site is currently used for contract parking. However, the applicant has put forward an argument saying that it is underused, and notwithstanding, there is a plethora of other car parking spaces within Godalming to meet the needs if the application were to be approved. Parking and highway considerations. Our friends at the County Highway Authority have looked at the application and raised no objection on parking or highway. parking and highway safety. Bin storage and surfacing, the application makes provision for the storage of bin and recycling in the area to the east of the site, to the west, rather. Matters of judgment. Looking at impact on visual amenity, the visual amenity is more important here because of the sensitive location in which the site is located. It's in the conservation area and adjacent to listed buildings and forms part of the setting of those listed buildings. The conservation, historic buildings officer from the local authorities had a look at the site and considers that subject to the detailed control through conditions of the materials, he thinks that these would add an attractive feature and would enhance, preserve and enhance that quality of the conservation area and would not have a detrimental impact on the setting of the adjacent listed building. With regards to amenity space, it is proposed that the gardens have a rear amenity space of 5 metres deep. Now, whilst I appreciate that's not a huge amount of space, it is significant enough to meet the needs of a 2-bed dwelling, and notwithstanding, we are in close proximity to the Borough's field. Now on to trees. Some members may recall that this site was treed at some point in the past, and there was an application approved by the authority for the removal of some trees in this location under the tree removal application some time ago. As part of that application, there was a requirement for replacement planting, and this has been achieved on site, in the vicinity of this site, where I'm not 100% sure, but I do know they're 2 London plane trees. Councillor Thompson may know more about London plane trees than I am not quite sure, but they are somewhere within the proximity of this site. Next, on impact on residential amenities, officers consider that the separation distance between this proposal and the application and this application site and neighbouring properties is sufficient so as to not have a detrimental impact on residential amenity. Therefore, the recommendation is as set out on page 55, thank you very much, of the agenda, that permission be granted subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We should have one public speaker, but I have a feeling that Mr. Hall is not with us this evening. So let's move on to the members' views. Mr. Lee, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I did visit site this afternoon because I couldn't sort of get my head around what I was seeing on the plans. And yes, I appreciate that there are the floor plans on the website. And my own experience of looking at things on the website and on the computer screen is not as good as coming in and having a look at the plans and perhaps using a scale rule and things like that. So that has become my normal practice now. So not having had that opportunity really to do that this time, and yes, we can see the Costa Coffee canopies. I can't just make out exactly how close they are to the boundary. But I think my main problem is that I'm only dealing with sort of part of the information because we've not got it in the pack. So from my point of view, I will have to abstain from making any judgment one way or the other, and I would ask that this particular application, consideration of it, is deferred. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'm concerned about primarily is the Friday market. If the vehicles were parked there wish to move out or enter the site, it's going to cause considerable difficulties to the stall holders, many stall holders, who line up along the entrance there. Also, when vehicles leave there, they will need a turning circle, and that will impinge upon stalls in the middle of the marketplace. What guarantee can we have that the stall holders would not be disadvantaged by this? Also, of course, there is the trouble caused to pedestrian shoppers there, having to get out of the way and dodge these cars.
What we have is the word of the applicant, of course, who rents the space out to the marketplace, and he is making a return from the market. So one would expect that he wouldn't want to do anything to prejudice that going forward. But the market is, whilst the lawful use of this land is market space, of course it is the applicant's land. And he's saying that it won't prejudice the market. I'm afraid that's a stronger control as the authority has. The authority has no power to ensure the market continues, of course. It is up to the landowner to continue that market, and he suggests that this application wouldn't prejudice it in any way.
Thank you very much. Ms Thompson?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. If I can just highlight page 49, when talking about parking and highway considerations. Now, am I right in thinking that the owner of the market site has designated that specific area for the parking for the residential properties? And it says in this report that it will be conditioned, and I think there is a condition, is there not? 12, condition 12. It says no duties development, blah, 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 blah. The parking area shall be used and retained exclusively for its designated use. Now, what's its? Is it for the designated use of the residential properties? And is that absolutely clear? Because we're giving planning permission on the understanding that those three places will form part of, presumably, they won't form part of the freehold or the leasehold that's sold of those houses. So at any one point, although we give permission for those houses because they have three spaces, what would happen if the owner of the market site then turned round and said, well, they're not available anymore? I mean, do you understand that I think there's some fragility around there and I need some reassurance?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. We could strengthen up condition 12 so as to ask for some scheme to be submitted to ensure that those three spaces are reserved for the occupiers of the three individual dwellings, so they would be tied together in some way if members are minded for that to happen.
Yes, I think it's pretty pointless if it's not tied, because we're looking at this on the basis that parking spaces are being made available, and I don't want us to be looking at an application where that designated space can be moved or shoved around or done away with as soon as we've ticked the box. That's just not acceptable to me at all. The other issue is around us having a letter. I'm sorry to go on about trees. I don't mean to really be that grumpy about them, but on page 51, we have the replacement trees have been planted in the position agreed by the council, and the agent has confirmed in a letter that those trees would be retained. But I would like that conditioned, because there is no point in us taking reassurance that those trees will be retained if it's not conditioned, because I think that's part of the overall plan, is it not, that I have in my head? That you know, the visual amenity will be improved.
Sorry, I rather think that those two trees are part of application WA 2012/1936 rather than the application that we're actually considering. But Barry, perhaps you'd like to offer a view?
Well,
thank you. So this application 2012/1936 included the removal of some trees within the conservation area. As part of that application, the permission was granted for the removal of those trees subject to the planting of replacement trees. Those replacement trees have been planted and are to be retained. There is a condition on the previous application that says they must be retained for 5 years. If they die within that period of time, they shall be replaced. So that's the period of time in which they are protected for. Within 5 years, one would then expect that they become reasonably substantial trees which are in the conservation area and then enjoy the protections of being in the conservation area. So those trees that have been planted do have some protection.
No, I haven't. Thank you for clearing that item up. Going back to the bin storage and servicing on page 49, I mean, in principle, I agree with a lot of the comments made by the conservation officer in his report. I think this is a scheme that is very modest, it's in keeping, and it doesn't, for me, detract from the conservation area. And I think the design has been given some careful thought. But it has to be said that looking closely, there is not a lot of amenity space. And in that site, on that site, you would not expect a huge amount, and you can walk children safely to the park without having to cross any main roads or anything like that. So I'm generally comfortable with accommodation of that nature being in that position. But I am very aware that because the living space is tight, it's not a spacious bit of accommodation there. You have one bathroom. There are none of the bells and whistles that we usually get where they try and shove extra shower rooms and goodness knows what. So it's tight, and it's open plan downstairs. It's very much a worker's cottage layout, and the amenity space around and the proximity to a busy and noisy cafe area immediately to the back all remind people that they're living on top of each other in the nicest possible way. So I think we have to be doubly sure that the amenity space that is there is used well, designed well, and serviced properly. And so bin storage and servicing actually become really quite crucial, because you only need a smelly bin when you're living in that sort of proximity for things to be very unpleasant, not just for the dwellers, but also for the people who are probably sitting in Costa, in the coffee garden, which once upon a time would probably have been a beer garden. And I note that space, it says in the report that there is probably, what's the phrase, appears to be, that's it, appears to be of a sufficient size to accommodate the bins required. Now, I need a little more reassurance on that than just appears to be, particularly as I believe that space is going to be used for storing cycles as well. I mean, can we be reassured that you get 3 decent-sized bikes and 6 bins in that area?
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. The words appear are rather woolly, but it has been assessed by, I can never pronounce the chap's name, Franchetti, or bin chap, and he's happy for it. So it's in this location now on your screen, is here where the bin storage and cycle storage is to be, and we are content that it can accommodate our ever-growing number of bins in Waverley, which is a positive thing for recycling and for all sorts of waste, and 3 bikes.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you. I have to say, although these are small houses, they're certainly bigger than the 2 up and 2 down house that I bought, which was built in the 1870s when I first purchased a house. So I think it's pretty good as a starter home. I will go along with the officer's recommendation here again. Although I have some concerns, I think the parking does impinge on the operation of the market, which is a sadness. And I'm also very sad to lose more contract parking. I think the parking situation in the town of Godalming has become ever more acute, and every time we sort of see a little loss here and a little loss there, the position only gets worse. However, I will go along with the recommendation and support the officers.
Thank you very much. Just a small point. Whilst obviously the provision of 2 new trees, London Planes, I believe they are, on application of WA 2012/1936. I think if we turn to page 39, there in the middle, sprouting above the rooftops, I believe quite possibly is one of the London Planes. And it looks quite healthy, still has leaves on. Mr. Morgan. Sorry? No, the leaves would have dropped by now if it was a birch.
Chairman, may I just say that I am a little concerned by the lack of the lack of diagrammatic representation in this report. It really would have been a lot more helpful had it been there. But thank you to the officers for some explanation at least. I'm concerned that the town council is worried about access to the market, and that does give me some concern. I'm still undecided, so hopefully somebody still has something to say that might be persuasive. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any further comments, ladies and gentlemen? Mrs. Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share the concerns about the market, but on the other hand, that the market landowner is, I think, trying to make a living as well. And when we've been there in the market, this space has been open. And looking at the plans, I think they're actually rather attractive. They blend in well, particularly with Craddocks, etc. And little homes like this are extremely sustainable, walkable everywhere anybody would want to walk. So I'm with the officers on this one.
Thank you. No further speakers? You're back again, Ms. Thompson.
Like a bad penny, Mr. Chairman. I just would be grateful if the officers could give me some idea of the wording of the condition around the retention of the parking space and their tie to the houses. I think that's all right.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could suggest some wording. So we're looking at condition 12 on page 57, and I think the first sentence hopefully can be left. No new development should be occupied until space has been laid out within the site in accordance with the approved plans for cars to be parked. At that point, the designated spaces, as shown in red at the top of the plan, would need to be provided. And the second sentence then to be amended, I suggest to read, the parking area shall not be used other than for the use of the occupiers of the properties hereby permitted, or along those lines. Exclusive use, yes. Thank you, Chairman.
Would members be comfortable with that? Yep. Okay. So I think there are no further speakers. If I could take us back to our first speaker was actually Mr. Lee, and I think you suggested, Mr. Lee, as you hadn't had a chance to have a look at this, that this application be deferred.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would still prefer that. Thank you.
Perhaps then I could put it to other members. You heard Mr. Lee's reasons for suggesting it. Can I see those members in favour of a deferment? I fear it doesn't fly, Mr. Lee. So we'll move to the recommendation then, which is on page 55. If I could just turn the page. And that is subject to a raft of conditions, including the amendment to condition 12 to ensure that the parking areas for these properties remain for their exclusive use. The officer's recommendation is that permission be granted. Can I see those in favour of the officer's recommendation? And those against? Abstentions? An abstention. Permission then, ladies and gentlemen, is granted. I wonder, Elizabeth, bearing in mind that I think I might have mentioned it at a briefing on Monday, but also it's been mentioned here this evening, perhaps we could have, I don't think I've met Megan Rowe before, but it might be worthwhile mentioning that a few additional sections, elevations and so on in any of her future reports would be very much appreciated. And also, members, I think we have met before Flo Taylor, proud mother of a baby boy, and I wonder if we might perhaps send her her congratulations, our congratulations.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We explained to the Eastern Committee that she left off the end of last week and never came back because baby came a little bit early, but so we never got a chance to wish her well on maternity leave, but she's gone ahead anyway, so it's all good news. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a safe journey home.